TV cop Don Johnson reportedly doing with billions of dollars? That's what German officials may want to know.
He was once the king of prime time. A face so recognizable, a style so imitated, and a presence so dominant that Don Johnson was the 1980s. Fast cars, luxury yachts, flashing lights, he had it all. But today, he lives alone, quiet, unnoticed. And what happened in between is more disturbing than anyone could have predicted. How does someone who reached the absolute pinnacle of fame end up in total obscurity? How did a man who wore $2,000 suits and vacationed with celebrities end up nearly homeless and forgotten? And, more importantly, why has no one talked about this until now? Don Johnson wasn't just famous. He was the symbol of everything glamorous and excessive in Hollywood. But behind the designer shades and the million-dollar smiles, something dark was growing, something no amount of fame or fortune could hide. This isn't just a story about losing money, it's a story about losing yourself. And once you hear how deep this rabbit hole goes, from addiction and betrayal to scandal, shame, and silent recovery, you won't believe how it ends. What if I told you that at the height of his stardom, Don Johnson was already planting the seeds of his own destruction? That every party, every romantic scandal, every luxury purchase was part of a slow-motion collapse that no one saw coming? By the end of this video, you'll see a man not as a legend or a has-been, but as a raw, broken human being who clawed his way out from the bottom. Barely. And now, at 75, Don Johnson's life is not what the world imagined. The heartbreaking truth is, no one expected to see him like this before the downfall, before the lawsuits, the addiction, the heartbreak. Don Johnson was untouchable. He wasn't just another actor. He was the actor of the 1980s, the man every network wanted, every woman adored, and every man envied. With one smirk and a rolled-up blazer sleeve, he changed television and fashion forever. When Miami Vice hit the airwaves in 1984, no one saw it coming. Neon lights, synthesizer music, designer outfits, it was unlike anything TV had seen before. And at the center of it all, Detective Sonny Crockett, played by Don Johnson with a confidence that blurred the lines between character and reality. He didn't just act cool, he was cool. He wore Armani like armor, cruised around in a Ferrari Daytona, and even had a pet alligator. The world became obsessed. Suddenly, every guy was trying to grow stubble like Don. Every department store was selling pastel shirts and white loafers. No socks, of course. At the height of his fame, Johnson was pulling in $100,000 per episode, a fortune at the time. He wasn't just making money, he was printing it. Magazine covers, hit songs, movie roles, he did it all. And with every success came more lavish spending. Multiple homes, luxury cars, yachts, private jets. Don Johnson didn't just live large, he redefined excess. He had a sprawling ranch in Colorado, a high-rise in Miami, and a Hollywood Hills mansion that was the scene of legendary parties. His car collection? Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, all lined up like trophies. And it wasn't just the money. Don Johnson ran in elite circles. We're talking about late-night champagne toasts with Jack Nicholson, weekend getaways with Barbra Streisand, and quiet dinners with Al Pacino. He was everywhere, and everyone wanted to be where he was. But the most dangerous part of his fame wasn't the pressure or even the access to everything. It was the illusion. The illusion that this life would never end, that the spotlight would never fade, that the money would never dry up. In interviews, he would smile and crack jokes about how good life was. But even then, insiders say there were signs: restless behavior, impulsive decisions, whispers of excess. Still, no one dared question the king. For a time, Don Johnson wasn't just living the American dream, he was the American dream. A kid from nowhere who became a cultural icon, a multi-millionaire, a sex symbol, and a household name. But no one, not his agents, not his fans, not even Don himself, was ready for what came next. Don Johnson's rise to fame becomes even more haunting when you understand where he started. Before the Ferraris and the $10,000 suits, he was just Donnie Wayne Johnson, born into poverty in a tiny Missouri town most people couldn't find on a map. His mother was only 16. His father was 19. Two teenagers trying to raise a child while barely surviving themselves. It wasn't just a humble beginning, it was a life full of instability, financial stress, and emotional chaos. They moved to Wichita, Kansas when Don was young, but things didn't get better. Don described his childhood as cold, lonely, and full of emotional absence. His parents, overwhelmed by their own struggles, weren't equipped to provide stability. By the time he was 12, they divorced, and Don was left to navigate life almost completely on his own. At 16, he ran away from home. That choice, leaving behind the only family he knew, wasn't out of rebellion. It was out of survival. He later said in an interview, "I was deeply unhappy. I didn't have a family. I had to become one for myself." It's the kind of pain that doesn't show up on camera, but stays buried under a confident smile and cool wardrobe. But even in that dark place, Don had a spark. In high school, he stumbled into a drama class. It wasn't passion at first, he just needed the credits. But the stage changed everything. For the first time, he felt seen. He felt heard. The applause replaced the silence of his home life. "The moment I got on stage," he said, "it was a drug. The audience gave me something I'd never gotten at home: validation." That drug, attention, admiration, would go on to fuel much of his adult life. But at this point, it gave him a purpose. After high school, he enrolled in the University of Kansas on a partial scholarship for drama. Eventually, he moved on to the prestigious American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, where the seeds of his acting career were truly planted. And from there, it was only a matter of time before Don Johnson went from forgotten teenager to Hollywood elite. When Don Johnson loved, he didn't just fall, he crashed. And the wreckage left behind was often public, messy, and heartbreaking. His love life was a tabloid's dream: whirlwind marriages, scandalous affairs, and emotional reunions that felt more like movie scripts than real life. By the time he was in his 30s, Don had already been married twice, to two women so obscure most fans still don't know their names. He once described one as a dancer and the other as a rich bimbo. Both marriages were annulled in days. It was impulsive love, fueled by ego, money, and that invincibility that comes with stardom. But then came Melanie Griffith. They met on the set of The Herod Experiment in the early 70s. She was just 14. He was 22. The age gap was controversial then, and would be even more so today, but their connection was intense and undeniable. By the time she turned 18, they were engaged. And in 1976, they married. 7 months later, divorced. Yet somehow, their love never really died. More than a decade later, in 1989, they reunited. This time they had a daughter, Dakota Johnson, the same Dakota who'd go on to become a Hollywood star in her own right. But even that chapter didn't last. By 1996, they were divorced again. Still, both of them insisted the love was real, just complicated. But Melanie wasn't the only headline. Don dated Barbra Streisand. Yes, that Barbra. For a while in the late 80s, they were Hollywood's most unexpected power couple. He also had a serious relationship with actress Patty D'Arbanville, with whom he had a son, Jesse. And then there were the ones that raised eyebrows, like his relationship with Jody Lynn O'Keefe, his on-screen daughter in the show Nash Bridges. She was 18. He was in his late 40s. The backlash was swift. But Don, as always, stayed unapologetic. But everything changed in 1999. That's when Don met Kelly Flieger, a former preschool teacher and socialite with a calm presence that was the exact opposite of the chaos he was used to. She was 27, he was 49. Yet the relationship stuck. They married quietly, without the flash of red carpets or tabloids. Over 20 years later, they're still together. 3 kids. No scandals, just peace. For a man who lived like a rock star, Kelly became the anchor he never knew he needed. But by then, the damage had already been done. The broken marriages, the child support, the emotional scars, they all had a cost, one that would soon come due. Fame can be a drug. But for Don Johnson, it wasn't just metaphorical. When Miami Vice exploded in the mid-'80s, Johnson became one of the most famous men on the planet. He had it all: fame, fortune, fans, and freedom. But behind the velvet ropes and private jets, his life was spiraling out of control. Hollywood in the '80s was wild. Clubs were open all night and the substances flowed freely, and Don, rich, overworked, emotionally damaged, dove in head first. In interviews years later, he admitted, "It doesn't become a problem immediately. It sneaks up on you." But it didn't take long before the partying became more than just part of the lifestyle. It became an escape. An escape from what, though? From the pressure of being perfect. From the childhood trauma he never truly faced. From the emotional toll of public breakups and failing relationships. Alcohol became his crutch. The bright lights of the club replaced the hollow silence of a lonely home. By the early 1990s, it was showing. His mood grew erratic. He clashed with radio hosts, lashed out during interviews, and struggled to maintain the golden boy image that had made him famous. Eventually, he checked into rehab, quietly, privately. No press statements, no photos. Just a man at rock bottom trying to find a way back up. He would later say that the addiction didn't ruin him overnight. It chipped away at his foundation, slowly, subtly. Until one day he woke up and realized he had built his empire on sand. And while Don fought to get clean, the world kept spinning. New stars rose, networks moved on, scripts stopped arriving, and for the first time in decades, Don Johnson was no longer in demand. He was no longer the hottest actor on television. He was a recovering addict with a complicated past and a fading spotlight. And as if that wasn't enough, the darkest chapter was just around the corner. A scandal so bizarre and unbelievable, it would nearly destroy what was left of his reputation. It was supposed to be just another luxurious trip for Don Johnson, a quick flight into Europe, private jet, designer luggage, custom suits. But in November 2002, everything changed forever. Don landed at the German-Swiss border, expecting a smooth customs check. But instead, officers opened his briefcase and made a discovery that shocked international investigators: financial documents tied to offshore accounts totaling over $8 billion. Yes, billion. These weren't just business receipts or investment plans. They were sensitive, high-level documents connected to shadowy transactions, huge transfers, and unnamed third parties. Immediately, alarm bells went off. Customs officials launched an investigation on the spot. Don Johnson, America's former heartthrob, was now a potential suspect in a multi-billion-dollar money laundering scheme. The media exploded. Headlines read like thriller novels. Don Johnson linked to $8 billion financial conspiracy. Some said he was a frontman for international bankers. Others claimed he had been duped by shady businessmen. Theories spread like wildfire. Don, for his part, denied everything. He said he was simply traveling with business partners and carrying film financing documents. Nothing more. No cash, no laundering, just paper. And after a lengthy investigation, German authorities agreed. There was no evidence of a crime. He was cleared. No charges were filed. But by then it was too late. The scandal left a stain that wouldn't wash off. Don's image was already bruised from years of rumors and excess. This incident shattered what was left of his credibility. In Hollywood, reputation is everything. And once it's gone, the phone stops ringing. Producers pulled out, deals dried up, and suddenly Don Johnson found himself spiraling into financial chaos. What few people knew was that even before the scandal, Don's finances were crumbling. Despite the millions he earned during his heyday, he had spent recklessly: lavish homes, failed investments, expensive divorces. There was no safety net. The $8 billion scandal was the spark that lit a financial wildfire, one that would bring him to the brink of complete collapse. By the early 2000s, the fortune was gone, the fame had faded, and Don Johnson, once the icon of cool, was facing the one thing he had never prepared for, being broke. The warning signs had been there for years, but no one imagined things would get this bad. He defaulted on nearly a $1 million loan, and not just any loan, it was tied to his crown jewel, a stunning 10,000-square-foot mansion in Aspen, Colorado. One of the most exclusive properties in the country, a place of comfort, power, and legacy. Until the bank came knocking. Don Johnson was hours away from foreclosure. The house, his sanctuary, was on the verge of being seized. It was a public nightmare. Reporters swarmed. Headlines mocked his fall from grace. TV icon nearly loses home, from Miami Vice to mortgage crisis. And then, in the 11th hour, he was saved. A mysterious financial backer stepped in. To this day, no one knows exactly who. Some say it was a wealthy friend. Others believe he sold personal items, art, jewelry, even classic cars. Whatever the truth, it was barely enough. The home was saved, but the damage was done. The world now knew Don Johnson was in serious trouble. And the creditors kept lining up. Aspen Valley Hospital, a law firm, a local liquor store. The man who once graced the covers of GQ now owed thousands to neighborhood vendors. Worse, the industry had moved on. Casting directors weren't calling. Studios didn't want controversy, and Hollywood doesn't wait. For the first time in decades, Don Johnson was not just alone. He was irrelevant. It's hard to explain what it means to go from the center of the world to total silence. In his prime, Don Johnson couldn't walk down a street without being mobbed. He couldn't check into a hotel without paparazzi waiting. But by his late 60s and early 70s, he was living a life that looked nothing like the one he built. The friends he partied with, gone. The Hollywood invites, stopped. The entourage, disappeared. And now, at 75, Don Johnson lives in solitude, far away from the spotlight that once defined him. He doesn't appear at premieres, he rarely gives interviews, and even when he works, it's under the radar, supporting roles, cameo appearances, small projects that most fans never hear about. He's not bitter, but he is quiet, reflective, and according to those close to him, often lonely. For a man who once had everything, the silence is deafening. But Don Johnson didn't vanish. He adapted. After years of chaos, he chose sobriety. He stopped chasing roles and instead embraced those that made sense. Wise mentors, complicated characters, smaller parts that let him work on his own terms, and slowly the redemption began. He reconnected with his children, strengthened his bond with Kelly, his wife of over 2 decades, found peace in fatherhood and purpose in staying clean. He even returned to screen, appearing in shows like Eastbound and Down, and more recently in Netflix's Rebel Ridge, gaining a new audience who didn't know him from pastel suits, but as a survivor. He speaks rarely, but when he does, it's with perspective. He knows what he lost. And more importantly, he knows what he still has. Looking back, Don Johnson's life is a masterclass in extremes. He lived higher than most could ever dream and fell harder than most could ever survive. But he did survive. The yachts are gone. The magazine covers are old. The suits are in storage. But what remains is a man who's still standing, still breathing, and still learning. It's easy to judge celebrities when they fall. But behind every scandal is a person. Behind every foreclosure, a family. Behind every addiction, a wound. Don Johnson's story isn't just about fame, it's about fragility and redemption and reality. He may live alone now, but he's not empty. He's earned something far greater than headlines. He's earned wisdom. And as he quietly lives out his days, we're left to ask, did Don Johnson finally learn from his past, or is there still one more chapter left to be written? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you love emotional, real stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss what happens next.